Hi there. Yes, it's budget week. This Thursday, Finance Minister P. Chidambaram will present the union budget for the year 2013. General elections are up next year, but the government is badly cash-strapped and growth is the lowest in a decade, and we have a high fiscal deficit. In this situation, can the UPA afford a populist budget geared towards vote catching, or does it necessarily have to tread the path of fiscal prudence and economic growth? Tonight, we're exploring the politics behind the budget 2013 and asking, should political compulsions determine economic goals in budget 2013? Joining us, Sachin Pilot, Union Minister of Corporate Affairs. Joining us, Piyush Goyal, Member of Parliament of the Rajya Sabha and Treasurer of the BJP. Joining us, Nilotpal Basu, Senior Leader of the CPIM. Joining us, and BJ Panda, Member of Parliament of the Biju Janata Dal. Joining us. Let's kick it off with you, Sachin Pilot. In Budget Week, we've seen the spurt of reforms that the UPA government has enacted over the last 6 months. What now is the priority of the government? To win elections in 2014 with SOPs and subsidies and Narega and food security bill, or to arrest what many are calling India's economic crisis with the highest fiscal deficit in history, as the RBI governor has said, and the lowest growth in a decade? What is the priority of the government?
Well, first of all, Sagarika, any union budget that any government presents, I think it should be, removed from the electioneering and the politics of what goes on. Elections will come and go, but this country deserves a budget that is sustainable, forward-looking, growth-oriented, creates jobs, looks after the agrarian as well as the middle classes. And I think the fiscal deficit numbers are large, but I wouldn't be so alarmist as to call it the grave danger that some have termed it. It's certainly something that we need to put a curb on, and I think what is far more important is not just to have the spending, but have the spending done in a way that is so precise and surgically put out to people who deserve it the most. So the leakages and loopholes that exist in the system need to be covered up, and the bottlenecks in the investments projects that we have seen need also to get out of the way. So this budget, I think, is going to be a balanced budget. It has to focus on growth and a sustainable growth model that will reflect the true potential it has to present for itself.
So the budget will focus on growth is what Sachin Pilot is telling us. Piyush Goyal of the BJP, to what extent has the BJP also played such divisive politics over the economy? It seems as if your motto has been that the country can lose, but Manmohan Singh must fail. You have blocked the government on FDI and retail. You blocked the government on goods and services tax. You have not supported the government on pension reform. You've not supported the government on insurance reform. Surely this is just plain politics. As far as growth is concerned, the BJP has been a growth obstructing force rather than a force that achieves or tries to achieve some sort of bipartisan consensus with the government in order to push growth. Because as a result of this politics, Piyush Goyal, we are left with the lowest growth rate at the moment in a decade. India is facing a bad economic situation.
Sagarika, are you speaking as the spokeswoman of the Congress or as an independent television?
Mr. Goyal, do not make this polemical. Do not make this polemical. I'm asking you. I asked a similar question to the Congress as well. Do not engage in clever semantics. I'm simply asking you, are you playing politics? Are you playing politics here with the future of India? Are you playing politics here with generations, with new generations?
I'm surprised. I'm extremely surprised at your question. In the first place, let me set the record straight. This government has done no significant reform. Even in the last 6 years, I don't think increasing prices and causing more burden to the common man is reform. What Sachin just now said would have been true reform if they had actually brought in administrative reform, if they had actually tried to clean up their act in terms of approvals, in terms of giving the growth a momentum. I would have considered that as true reform. What Sachinji just said, I think, needs to be done, and I don't think it needs the budget. It could have been jolly well done without the budget, but certainly budget is an opportunity to introspect and to take the country forward on the fast growth path. And I do hope a sanguine person like Mr. Chidambaram uses this opportunity to give a message to the world that India means business, policy paralysis is over, we are not going to be politically right, we are going to be economically right in this budget.
But I hope,
however,
you say that.
However,
you say that, Mr. Goyal,
Sagarika,
but the BJP doesn't seem
finish.
to believe in pushing the reforms agenda. Go ahead.
Let me finish, ma'am. Let me finish. The question you raised is completely erroneous. It is not my job to go to the government and tell them that, hey, we want to support you, we want to support you. I have been at pains to talk to representatives of the government, to talk to representatives of business and industry, that we are willing to cooperate and support this government if only they would talk to us and come up with policies that are in national interest.
That's a good point. The fact is that the government...
One minute, Sagarika, one minute. I believe there are 100 things that need to be done. This government does not address the 98 issues on which there is consensus across the political spectrum. They choose to do the two things on which there is contentious difference of opinion. Parties across the national spectrum are opposed to multi-brand retail FDI. They choose to do that one act which gets them no brownie points, no FDI, but sets the agenda adrift. I wish the government to talk to us, bring in policies that there is national consensus.
So there's been a communication deficit. There's been a communication deficit. Mr. Goyal, let me bring the other panelists in as well. Jay Panda, let me get you to address what Piyush Goyal is saying. And in a sense, he's making a valid point that the government has not reached out enough. The government has not communicated the benefits of these so-called economic reforms. The government has not even spoken to the public about the benefits of economic reforms. It has not built that political consensus around economic reforms. But why is it that politicians across the board are suspicious of economic reforms? Why do politicians have an anti-economic reform mindset? Why is it still subsidies and SOPs and freebies and free power and free rice and free food and these free amenities that politicians lean towards? Does there have to be a change in thinking that yes, economic reforms also can win you votes?
Sagarika, I will answer that, but first I think it is important to understand that a great deal of progress for the economy has been available from many sections of the opposition, which the government has somehow been not capable of recognizing and taking advantage. I think the single biggest big-ticket item that the government is considering is the GST. And just like happened 10 years ago with VAT, several state governments were ready to go ahead as long as their fears were assuaged, that if they had revenue loss, that would be underwritten by the central government. And that caused many years of delay, but when the central government agreed to underwrite the potential revenue losses of the state government, VAT happened.
Right.
And in the event, there were no revenue losses and the central government didn't have to pay anything. And the same thing is being repeated. There is deja vu all over again. GST has been a doable deal for more than a year, for maybe 2 years, if the central government were to reach out and assuage some of the state governments about underwriting their potential revenue losses, but they have been dragging their feet and missing a wonderful opportunity. And there are other opportunities. You know, for example, I just saw your clip about the finance minister talking about a tax for the super rich. Now, my chief minister Naveen Patnaik made a proposal for a windfall profits tax in the mining sector. Exactly same principle, but only 3 months ago turned down by this same central government. So you can't be talking in two voices on exactly the same issues and then expect to get cooperation. And then now I'll answer your question. The reason why reforms are not widely supported is because they have not been widely sold. Even this government, until it faced a political crunch 7-8 months ago, it was anti-reforms, this same government. So unless the government of the day actually goes out of its way to sell reforms, I'm afraid they're not going to get
that's a very good point. That communication deficit has to be filled. In fact, it's not enough for Manmohan Singh to make speeches saying that money doesn't grow on trees or we have to bite the bullet. He has to do much more than that. But let me bring in Nilatpal Basu of the left. Mr. Nilatpal Basu, you of course are ideologically opposed to what you consider neoliberal reforms. You are opposed to neoliberal economics. You believe that this is a corporate-oriented government. But do you also believe believe that are you forced to concede that perhaps there is no alternative to the kind of price rises that the government has had to go in for? There is no alternative to raising the price of diesel. There is no alternative to raising the price of oil. There is perhaps now no alternative beyond capping that LPG subsidy because of the nature of the fiscal deficit. It is soaring. As the RBI governor himself has said, and I repeat, this is the highest fiscal deficit in history, is what the RBI governor has said. So what can the government do but try to raise revenues and fill that deficit? So do you accept that the government is pushed to the wall? It has to raise prices.
Sagarika, first of all, let me concede that I really don't understand the distinction that you are making between economics and politics. Because economics means raising of taxes, raising of resources. But when you decide from whom to raise resources, from whom to raise taxes, it becomes also a political question. Similarly, on the expenditure side, when you decide that you are going to spend, now for whom you are spending, that while being an economic question is also a political choice. Therefore, I think this whole hullabaloo over politics coming in the way of economics is absolutely a non-existent question. Second point is this: why is this crisis? Whether this crisis is because of too much dole-out. I was a little surprised when you spoke about everything, including subsidy and all that, but you just failed to mention that last year itself 2,28,000 crores of dole-outs in terms of corporate tax waiver was there by the government. And there was a reversal in the trend of raising direct taxes as a proportion to GDP. So, point is reform for whom? We have seen that growth is coming down. We have seen investment is coming down. Yet, in the last quarter of the year 2012, 50 top corporates of this country increased their profits by 12.5%. So, you see, the question is not growth per se. Who is going to benefit from the
whose growth?
Growth?
Right, whose growth and on whom is the government?
Just a minute. And therefore, globally also we are seeing this very problem that the growth is not sustainable because it is excluding a very huge section of the population. For a country like India of its size, if we could empower the people, if we could enhance their purchasing power, and if we could create employment,
right, but how are we going to do that?
A much better way of
how are we going to do that without economic reforms and without spurring growth? But we can go on debating that. But I want Sachin Pale to just respond to the comments that have been made by the other panelists on tonight's program. Sachin, respond to what Piyush is saying, that you haven't reached out to the opposition enough. You haven't built that bipartisan consensus that is necessary to push economic change. Same as what Jay Panda is saying, that you haven't reached out to the state governments. Goods and services tax is something you could have easily implemented if you reached out to the states enough. Nilotpal Basu, of course, they're saying you're a corporate leading government. But I want you to address this point about communication, the communication deficit that the UPA has suffered from in trying to build that consensus and also trying to build public opinion in favor of reform. That to me, that seems to be a key failing of the UPA.
That could be your view, Sagarika, but the fact is that my good friends on the panel understand that there is no point in preaching to the converted. Both of them understand the need for having good, effective reforms. Reform does not mean just privatization or disinvestment. Reforms also means to make sure that you're able to, create more wealth for the nation as a whole, and a society will benefit indirectly once we do that. I don't think government has failed in reaching out. In fact, there are areas, for example, Mr. Goyal mentioned about the FDI. Now, when the NDA was in government, they were proposing 100% FDI in multi-plant retail. And today, when you do 51%, there's a whole turnaround. So people act differently when they're in government and differently when they're in opposition. That's the nature of our politics, unfortunately. But I think if anyone feels that we have not done enough reaching out, I'm happy to do more. But the track record of what people say inside of Parliament, what they say on TV studios, and what really happens on the ground is for all to see. I don't think this blame game is required now, because what we need to do correct today is to make sure that whatever is on the agenda, there is a clear-cut position that each party takes. You can't do one voice, in the state you do something, in the lower house you vote one way, in the upper house you vote another way on certain issues. So these are things that means much easy to say that, we are not being talked to, whatever. But the positives of reform process, positives of a growth economy are for all to see. If anyone feels we've done not enough talking, I'm happy to do more. But I think this is all there, it's black and white for people to see. We just need to know where everybody stands.
We need to know where everybody stands. At the moment, where we stand is that we have that soaring fiscal deficit and we have the growth rate, which is the lowest in a decade. We're going to have to take a short break at this point. But Piyush Goyal is raising his hand, so I'm going to come back and get him to respond to what Sachin Pilot has just said. And we'll come back and also talk about the challenges before Chidambaram now. Can he ride out these political compulsions? The Congress party, as the member of the opposition has said, is not known either for being reformist. Can Chidambaram ride out the political compulsions and deliver a growth-oriented budget? What do our panelists think? That's after the break.
A trend on the street goes big online, which triggers your software that crunches the data, which begins production and reroutes distribution, which means you're ready. Some companies have increased online revenue up to 50% with help from smarter commerce. I'm an IBNer. Let's build a smarter planet.
जिंदगी एक सफर है जहां कभी कुछ खुले रास्ते अपनी बाहें फैलाकर हमारा स्वागत करती हैं, तो कभी कुछ राहें रुकावट बन जाती हैं, पर हम रुकते नहीं, थकते नहीं, बढ़ते रहते हैं कदम दर कदम, अपनी मंजिल, अपना घर। आम्रपाली ग्रुप, डेवलपिंग इंडिया।
Come on, you fast bowler rascals, together.
Last video of the match, 60 runs to get the crowd cheering for a miracle.
This is the leader style to bring a miracle. Let me remind it.
Bringing the world together, building the world together. Binani Cement for generations to come.
I'm gonna love you like nobody's loved you. Come rain or come shine. High as a mountain and deep as a river. Come rain or come shine.
अरे मैच इतनी जल्दी खत्म हो गया?
कोई आया ही नहीं, सब छुट्टियों में घूमने गए। पापा हम कब जाएंगे?
मुझे भी जाना है पापा।
हम भी छुट्टियों में घूमने जाएंगे।
पक्का पापा?
पक्का।
थैंक यू।
आपने झूठा वादा क्यों किया? घर की EMI देने के बाद कुछ बचता है क्या?
झूठा नहीं, सच्चा वादा है, क्योंकि मैंने अपना होम लोन स्टेट बैंक में शिफ्ट कर दिया है। अब EMI बहुत कम हो गया है।
सच?
अब बचत ही बचत। EMI हुआ कम, घूमने चले हम।
Wakudoki inside.
news, not just spicy, yet packed with flavor. News Night on DD News. News as it should be.
This is TV 18 and you are watching CNN IBN.
Welcome back to Face the Budget. We're asking, should political compulsions or will political compulsions once again determine the economic goals in Budget 2013? Remember, Union Finance Minister P. Chidambaram, though, is known to be a reformer, much more of a reformer than the previous incumbent, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. He has been someone who believes in reforms. He has delivered that dream budget in 1997. Will he be able to ride out those economic political compulsions and give a pro-growth budget? Piyush Goyal, you had a point for Sachin Pilot. You were raising your hand when I went into break. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Sagarika. Earlier on, you mentioned that the BJP obstructs reform. I just wanted to put that in perspective. This government could not have passed the Companies Act bill but for my party's support. This government could not even have introduced the pension reform bill in the House if my party had not stood up and supported it. They didn't even have the numbers in Lok Sabha to introduce the bill. Banking bill, money laundering bill was passed with our support. Insurance and pension, both of these bills, the government has talked to us, accepted the recommendations of the standing committee that FDI will be retained at 26%. Subsequently, they had a change of finance ministers and they decided to pass in the cabinet 49%. I have been at pains in the House on 20th December with the FM listening in and on many television channels. My party is willing to relook at it. After all, standing committee is not my party. There were 18 parties in that. Unanimously, they felt it should be 26 because of the bad presentation of this government. However, we said if you want to make it 49, we are open to a rethink. But we have concerns on valuation guidelines. We have concerns whether fresh FDI will come in. We have concerns on voting. I'm just trying to highlight to you, the failure is not the opposition.
You're
as Jay said, the failure is of the government.
The failure
DTC,
is of the...
we gave a report in March. Where is the DTC bill? GST, we have asked certain questions 8 months ago. No response from this government.
Mr. Goyal,
it is the government's singular failure. I am not responsible.
Mr. Goyal, the Prime Minister is on record saying a path-breaking initiative like the GST has been repeatedly blocked by the BJP. It's the BJP's hostility to the goods and services tax which is blocking the GST. But let me move right along. Jay Panda, I want to again put this in a larger perspective. If there is something interesting that Mr. Narendra Modi represents in Gujarat and his electoral success, if something interesting that represents is that he openly takes a very pro-business line. He's publicly pro-business, he's publicly pro-growth, he's publicly pro the corporate sector. Now, there are very few politicians who actually take publicly that pro-growth line and pro-corporate line and hope to win elections. Does it say something for the way the electorate is changing? A younger electorate perhaps is more aspirational, that they do not get put off by people taking a pro-growth, pro-corporate, pro-business line. Is there something to be learned there by politicians?
Sagarika, you're quite right that Gujarat has this image of being pro-growth and pro-business, but you should not forget that over the last 10 years, Odisha's growth rate has been slightly greater than Gujarat.
That's right, actually.
And there are other states like Bihar, which have also achieved similar things.
What I'm trying to say, Jay, is that the politicians don't have to be wary about being pro-business. They don't necessarily have to be wary about being pro-business, perhaps, in a new India.
Look, I don't think you necessarily have to be pro-business per se. You have to be pro-reforms. You have to be pro-markets. You have to be pro the economy being based on growth. And I think there are at least half a dozen states around the country that are doing it, perhaps with not as much advertisement as some states. But you know, we are often accused of being obstructionist. The fact is Let's take one example on
Right.
cash transfers, which is arguably one of the biggest projects of this government. Now, you know, I'm on record as having written in national newspapers in favor of cash transfers.
Right.
And yet today we are in a position that in my state, there are hardly any bank branches in rural areas. In my constituency, even block headquarters don't have bank branches. So how do we have cash transfers today? And you know very well as the whole country knows, that the reason that the cash transfers project has got delayed is because there were two factions within this government that were at loggerheads, and that caused several
That's a very
years
good
of
point.
delays.
In fact, the
And
government itself
so don't blame
is
the
at loggerheads
opposition.
with, right. The jury's out whether the government
when we are ready
itself
to support, the government is not ready to take that support.
believes in reform. I'm afraid we're completely out of time. I apologize to Mr. Nilotpal Basu and that we couldn't get a last comment in from him. I'm just going to quickly get Sachin.
Anyway, there is no point in calling me also. You could have as well had a debate amongst yourselves, because I have a counterpoint of view, and therefore
I
it's
know
fine.
your view.
And later on, I think just to show my face and to legitimize your program that we have all heads, don't call me, please.
No, but don't you feel, Mr. Nilotpal Basu, that at the end of the day,
I understand because you are opinionated, you have a certain understanding, and the fight that is going on, who is more reformist, and you are joining the fun. I have no problem with that.
No, I'm not joining the fight. I'm just asking you that as a member of the left, I know how critical you are of neoliberal economics. Don't you believe that, you know, what?
The whole crisis is because of the reform. You try
the
to
whole
find out
crisis is because of reforms.
The growth has why growth has come down like this? Why fiscal deficit has gone up? Because they were pursuing all these policies. It is happening worldwide, it is happening in India. It is a crisis with the paradigm itself, and you are not prepared to have a relook.
Right. No, because once we get into that debate, then we'll have to debate the crisis of capitalism and the crisis of international capital, which will take us into at least an hour of ideology.
Have a fight about reformers.
Right. So we'll the
You are not
crisis.
addressing not an ideological. It's an economic debate.
It's an economic debate. It's a crisis of capitalism. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time on this one. We're not going to be able to pursue this. Thank you very much indeed, Sachin Pilot, Piyush Goyal, Nilotpal Basu, Jay Panda joining us. Thanks very much. The insights have been very, very useful indeed. As I said, we're facing the highest deficit in the history, as the RBI governor has said. Lowest growth rate in a decade. The opposition saying the government has simply not reached out, not built that bipartisan consensus. The government being accused of spending too much of tax and spend and not generating enough revenue. Can Mr. P. Chidambaram deliver on the growth imperatives on Thursday? Can he rise above political compulsions? We'll have to wait and see. Thanks very much indeed for watching Fix the Budget.